Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 134. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with John Miles. John, the creator of Passion Struck, is a renowned authority in behavior change, wellness, and leadership. With a diverse background from the U.S. Navy to Fortune 550 executive roles, his insights are rooted in real-world experience. Through his podcast, Passion Struck, and his latest book, Passion Struck, 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life, he shares science-based principles for personal growth and living with purpose, endorsed by luminaries like Oprah Winfrey and many others. Recognized as a must-read for 2024, it inspires readers to overcome self-doubt and embrace intentional living. John, so glad to have you on the show today and super excited for our conversation.
Naftali, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm actually quite interested in that little piece that I read before about your bio and specifically the Navy. So I'm curious to number one, what inspired you to transition from that background in the Navy, the Armed Services, to becoming a thought leader and specifically in behavior change and wellness?
Well, that's a little bit of a long story because I never
You have
in a million
time.
years would have thought I would be doing that here today. I actually got out of the service for only one reason, and that's because I received an appointment to become a special agent for the FBI. And I was days away from going to my Quantico class. I had just gotten out of the military when my detailer called me up and said, unfortunately, your class has been recycled because Congress can't pass a budget. And naively, I thought, okay, we're talking about a few weeks here, maybe a month. I didn't realize it was going to be 36 to 48 months in the future. And so that really led me down a path I never thought I was going to have to go into, because I quickly had to go to a plan B, which I really hadn't contemplated. And that led me into the world of business. And specifically, my first role was with a company called Booz Allen. And it ended up being one of the best choices I could have made on that journey to going into the civilian world, because it gave me so much exposure to everything from working with government agencies to civilian clients, et cetera. And so that was the start of it. But I had reached the pinnacle, I could say, of my career. I had been a Fortune 50 CIO. I, at this point, was leading a software company as their chief executive officer. And I had been hearing this inner voice talking to me for quite a long time, telling me that the path I was on was not the path I was destined to live the rest of my life doing. And I think when we hear that voice, it can be a very challenging thing to stop what you're doing, to listen to it and to adhere to what it's telling you, because the message I got was, you're supposed to be helping the lonely, the battered, the beaten, the hopeless, the broken of the world. And I didn't understand what that meant, nor how I was supposed to serve them. And so what really jolted me to pursue this full time was an incident that happened in November of 2017. I had dropped my daughter off at school that morning, and it was just a typical Tuesday. And I went to Orange Theory, like I did many days during the week at that point in time. And unbeknownst to me, someone had been following me to understand my comings and goings. And on this day, it just so happened that we had an electrical fire at the Orange Theory. Fire trucks came, and I went home much sooner than I normally expected, and still wanted to get a workout in and was going to go for a bike ride. So I was going up my staircase when that spidey sense kicked in that told me something was not right. And my momentum carried me around this 90-degree corner of my staircase. And at about that same point, I started to hear deep breathing, excited breathing. and I knew I wasn't alone in the house. And my military training kicked in. I immediately went into threat analysis. And as I came around the corner, I saw a man standing at the top of my staircase pointing a gun at me. And at that point in time, you really have to make a quick decision, although it's almost as if time stands still. It's the same thing I experienced in combat. And I had a choice. Either I could rush the stairs and take the momentum with me and try to take him down, but I was really looking at point blank range. It wouldn't have been too difficult for him to shoot me. And the other option was to try to duck, evade, and get out of there and fight another day. And that's what I ended up doing. I went out the back. He ended up going out the front. They ended up arresting him about 6 months later when they were able to track him down. And then another incident happened about 4 or 5 days later that didn't even allow me to really process this first event. And that was one of my best friends ended up jumping off the Skyway Bridge here in St. Petersburg, which is a higher bridge, if you can think about it, than the Golden Gate Bridge, and ended up ending his life. And so those two events, as I was trying to process them, really were a wake-up call to me that life is finite. And I feel that this calling I had been given was for me to pursue my uniqueness and serving people in the way that only I could do it. And so I doubled down and really started at that point going into some deep self-introspection and awareness, doing a lot of meditation and mindfulness to really understand what was this goal that I was being given. And it finally came to me after some time that what I'm really supposed to be helping people do is to feel that they matter in life. And I feel so many people right now wake up in the morning and they don't feel a sense of significance or mattering in their life. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to help people do, is to create that life of significance, to become their self-realized self. But that's kind of the backstory.
Okay, well, that's a pretty heavy one. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm just curious to know, let's sort of stay there for now, because I don't know where where these, let's call them minimally philosophical questions that you just raised, intersect with you on a spiritual level. I happen to be of the Jewish faith and practice my Jewish faith in very open ways. I guess you would say Orthodox Jewish. And so for me, part of my religious worldview includes the fact that there's the world in which we live, the physical world, and then there's a spiritual world, so to speak, to which we transcend after death. And so when we think about life, when we think about purpose and all of that, there's an interconnectedness there. I know you're dealing with a broad range of people, and so I'm sure their faiths vary in different ways. But how do you approach the question of mattering, the question of the purpose of life, so to speak, and what is it specifically that you do that helps people to feel that they matter, and help chart them on a course to actualizing that let's call it potential, or that purpose, in a way that makes them feel that they're acting with integrity, that they're acting with alignment, and that it all kind of comes together for them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a pretty deep question. And what I've discovered on my own journey is I go back to the quote that Henry David Thoreau said, that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And and it really needs to be updated, because it's the mass of people lead lives of quiet desperation. And if you don't believe me, just look at what Gallup is reporting and has been reporting for a while, that there are over 900 million people in 142 countries who don't feel that their lives are fulfilling, and they don't feel fulfilled in what they do in life. And this is echoed by more studies that come out of Cornell University that Tom Gilovich, who's a psychologist there, is leading. And when he has asked thousands of people approaching the third chapter of their life what the biggest regret they have in life, it was completely different than what I expected. I expected it to be the mistakes that we make in life. And instead, 76% of them said it was not pursuing their ideal self. They are haunted by the what ifs and should haves that could have taken them to the ideal self that they wanted to become. And so when I think about this, why are so many people feeling like they don't matter? Why are so many people living these lives of quiet desperation? And I think it comes down to kind of what we're brought up now in society to do, is to think that what really matters in life is achieving success. It's amassing material wealth. It's ticking off tasks or chasing after promotions. Yet in this pursuit, we encounter a profound emptiness. And I know that's exactly what I felt when I was going through this. And so the quest for authentic living, to becoming this self-realized self, isn't about the superficial pursuit of monetary pleasures. It's about a much deeper rebellion against the societal norms that end up dictating our lives. It's a refusal to settle for a life that's defined by someone else's standards. And it's breaking away from that quiet desperation and reclaiming the power to author your own stories and create a truly fulfilling life. And so a concept I often like to talk about is something called self-discrepancy theory, which really has three states of self. There's your actual self, which is who you are at any given point in time. There's your ought self, OUGHT, which is who you think you should become, greatly influenced by the burdens of society, such as rent, car payments, etc., or what society tells us. And then there's the ideal self, which is who we could become. And I think so many of us, and I found this myself, fall in the trap of pursuing our ought self, because let's face it, those burdens build up, especially as you have a family and as you grow in your life. And once you find yourself there, it's very difficult to break free. So to me, I'm really asked, what is the key then to breaking free? And what I try to explain to people is what got you to where you are today has been a series of choices that you have made over countless years that have culminated into the state that you find yourself in. And I think people hear this or see themselves in the state and they want a quick fix. They want to just flip a light switch and go from being stuck to unstuck. And unfortunately, that's not the way it happens. To me, it's similar to experiencing burnout. And I've experienced it in pretty profound ways. And the journey to getting there started off in probably conditions that I didn't even perceive at the time. And then what ends up happening is it kind of builds up in the background, but it's happening so gradually that you don't even know what's happening until you reach probably a moderate state like I did. And then you have an inflection point, which then creates a hockey stick. And all of a sudden you've gone from wherever you were at in that moderate state to feeling completely numb and apathetic about your life. And I think the same thing is for people who are stuck. And so what I encourage people to do is that you really have to be intentional about the changes you want to make. And I think we overcomplicate that. For me, what I found myself living in was, it was as if I was sitting on a kitchen stool, but underneath me, there was only one support, and it was the constant grind. And when you're consumed by that, what ends up happening is you're neglecting everything else in your life. And so I started to view myself as if I was in a stool on that same kitchen stool, but it had multiple supports. And for me, that was physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and relationship health. Because I figured if I get all those things working and a strong foundation, then the career is going to take care of itself. But then it comes down to whatever foundation you pick, you can't do them all at the same time. So you got to pick an area to start at and be intentional about fixing it. And then I promise you, it will lead to cascading changes in your life. And so for me, I had experienced a ton of trauma, from sexual trauma to combat trauma to personal assault trauma, both earlier in my life and during that incident that I mentioned. And I had a ton of stuck points that I hadn't fully dealt with. So for me, to really build back my life, it really started with an intentional approach to building back my mental health. which meant putting myself into some very uncomfortable positions that I had to go through, such as cognitive processing therapy and then prolonged exposure therapy, EMDR, and some other things to break free from the things that were holding me back. And once I started working on that area of my life, other areas started to improve as well. And it takes time, but once you start having the courage, which is formed by taking these actions, you gain more courage, more confidence, and that leads you to taking more life expanding steps. And that's how you create a life of mattering and switch from being stuck in some state of indifference or apathy to becoming what I call passion struck.
Got it. Okay, we should talk about that more in the book. That's quite an answer. I'm going to choose one detail one area, I guess, that I'm just curious about, because it sounded to me the way you were describing it is that you're walking, let's say you're working with a leader of some kind, and you're helping that person who's risen similar to your own experience, risen to the top or the pinnacle of where they initially envisioned their career to get, only to then feel like I've been sold a bill of goods. I really don't have that sense of excitement, that sense of drive anymore. What else is there in life? There's got to be more. Um, and so, yes, people have to become more connected on each of those different verticals in order to really get the holistic sense of purpose, direction, mission, fulfillment, etc. But let's think about it, or I'd like to think about it, or at least ask the question, I should say, from the vantage point of the leader towards those that the leader leads, meaning to say, I want to create a work environment where there's greater sense of alignment, passion, not only for the work that we do, but that each person shows up individually in a healthier and more fulfilled place. Because I feel that that kind of employee will produce the very best results for the company. And of course, they'll be in a healthy place to really partner with us, so to speak, in our growth moving forward. So outside of putting every individual through a more rigorous, individualized, in-depth analysis and all the things that you were describing, what are some, let's call it general things that leaders can do to address this dilemma that you were describing and to create solutions, whether collective or individualized, that allow people under their leadership to show up as their very best selves?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a great question. And I'm going to talk about a chapter that I have in my book.
Okay.
I'm going to give you some context on how the book is arranged so that the listener understands where I'm coming from. So as I was building back my life, I started examining other what I call luminaries who had created what I consider to be passion struck lives. This was people like tennis player Novak Djokovic and Oprah Winfrey, Hilary Swank, the actress, Bono, uh, admirals, astronauts. And I ended up examining 750 of them. And as I was going through this, I found that there were 12, I call them principles, that they all seem to implement in their lives. And it just so happened that 6 of them are mindset shifts that they make, and 6 of them are behavior shifts. And the chapter I'm going to be talking about is titled The Gardener Leader, and it's one of the last behavior shifts that I discuss in the book. And what a gardener leader is really someone who leads with intention. They intentionally nurture their team's growth, akin really to how a gardener carefully tends to each plant. And it really involves a deep understanding, as you were talking about, of each individual who they serve's unique talents and potential, coupled with providing them the right environment and resources for them to thrive. So, in a nutshell, this leadership style is really about eyes on, hands off leadership, where the leader informs their employees without micromanaging, and they drive innovation by allowing the team members to have autonomy to experiment, to take risks, to develop creative solutions while still getting the guidance support of their leader. And a great example of this that I can give from my own career is I was hired into Lowe's Home Improvement during a period of pretty substantial change for the company. They were on a high growth period at this time, but they had just undergone the largest hacking incident at this point in time by any retailer anywhere in the world. And when I took this job, I knew I had to clean up the technology mess and, more importantly, a cultural mess within inside the company of not having a deep enough passion about security and how people were being educated about it. Because the way that this was infiltrated was two people were able to access an access point in a store, but unfortunately, the security measures on the network allowed them to ultimately get into the mainframe and to the general ledger of the company. And it had it not been for a computer operator, they could have done some very serious harm. What was striking to me was in my first week, I was called in to meet our head of HR. And I thought that this was going to be her going through an analysis of my direct reports, et cetera, which we got into a little bit of that. But the more shocking thing, and I wish she would have told me this before I got hired, was that they had just completed the employee engagement surveys. And out of 380,000 employees, we're talking 1,800 stores, distribution centers, et cetera, I had one of the top 2 lowest scoring functions in the entire company. And so I did what anyone would do, is I went out and I started to talk to my peers, and I talked to customers of the group to understand what they thought about it. And everyone came back with the same thing. You're pretty much going to have to get rid of everyone in your organization, starting from the top. They don't know what they're doing. They're not inspired, et cetera. And so I took that input, but then I did something that I would encourage every leader to do. And something that I learned in the military is, in order to get to the bottom of what's happening, you really need to talk to the people on the front line. And so I did that, and I had a 24/7 function. And so if that meant I had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to drive to our data center or to our watch centers or call centers to talk to employees on those watches, I did it. And what I heard from the lowest employee to my direct reports was that they didn't feel like anything that they did mattered. They didn't understand how the job that they were doing influenced the successful journeys of customers or aligned with the strategy of the company and how they influenced either one. But on top of that, the prior leadership had never treated them holistically as individuals. They really just kind of tunnel focused them on the jobs that they were in, not understanding what they had done in the past, what their aspirations for, but were, and also what was going on beyond that. And so I just changed the entire approach. I created what I call a line of sight, which allowed every person in their duties to understand directly how their job aligned to the strategy of Lowe's and how they benefited customer success. But more than that, I implemented Gartner leadership. I gave them the tools. I helped them understand the strategy, but I knew I couldn't be everywhere given the large size of the operation. And so what I ended up doing was creating the environment, creating the tools, creating the support structure for them to feel fulfilled in what they did. But then I also gave them the freedom to execute their jobs in the way that they thought was the best to solve the issues. And it's similar to a SEAL team going out on a mission. The person who's at Special Operations Command, who's giving the order, can't possibly know what's happening 5,000 miles away, but they have to realize that they've given them enough training and operational awareness to do the mission. And then it becomes down to being eyes on and hands off and letting them fulfill that mission to the best of their abilities. And the long story short on this is that 18 months later, when they redid the employee engagement survey, we went from the bottom 2 to the top 2 in the company. And I had one of the happiest group of individuals I ever worked through. I ended up turning over one direct report, but other than that, we really kept the entire group intact. And they really felt a complete different ownership because they felt like they mattered and that their roles held significance. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I do want to, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that both your podcast, your book, you used the term passion struck. It actually reminds, I don't know if you pulled it off of AC/DC, but kind of reminds me of the whole idea of thunderstruck there. Just curious, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make when they hear passion? Like what's the wrong definition, so to speak? And how do you utilize the term in a way that helps people to do their jobs better and with a higher degree of purpose and direction?
So I think what people do with passion is, to me, that passion, and it's like the cover that's behind me on my book. It's really this flame that drives your intrinsic motivation to want to tackle things that are outside of your comfort zone. But what I think the mistake people make is they don't really build that with purpose, meaning passion and purpose are two different things. Purpose is really understanding your uniqueness. To me, passion is then fueling that uniqueness. And where that really, I think, misses the boat is when people don't utilize the stoic virtue of wisdom to influence the decisions that are guiding them on where to focus their passion. And so oftentimes, if we're not intentional about what we're doing, we can have a lot of passion, but we might be fueling something that's taking us further away from our aspirations and ambitions. It might be out of an alignment with our core values. So to me, it's really having the recognition of knowing when you are going on a course that is not taking you to the point that you want to be in becoming your future self, and having the self-control to intentionally recognize that and then make adjustments that get you back on track. So I think that's what ends up happening is sometimes people have passion, but it's not focused in the right ways, and it's not aligned with their purpose, their actions, their aspirations, and ambitions.
Great answer. And since we are talking about mistakes, this is how I typically end the segment. I ask each of my guests to share the biggest mistake they've ever made and what they've learned from it, how it's helped propel them on the path that they're currently on.
Yeah, if I had to really be honest with this, I think it would be not doubling down on my belief in God until I was in my mid 30s, close to 40. I had grown up in a very religious Catholic family. But what I found with the Catholic Church, at least how I was raised, and I went to all parochial schools, was that we were taught from the Catholic schedule the different passages that they wanted to teach you. But I didn't feel like I was ever really encouraged to completely read the Bible. And it wasn't until I had spent some time attending some Methodist services that I decided to go through a course called discipleship. And in discipleship, you spend 36 weeks, 2 classes per week. So this is no trivial thing. Having the pastor guide you through the entire Bible. And then there's a discipleship 2 where you go through the New Testament, discipleship 3 where you concentrate on the Old Testament. And I know your name comes from the Old Testament, but it was the first time that I had really read end to end everything that happened. And what was remarkable for me, and it was such a fortunate experience, is that the pastor who led this course not only was a PhD in theology, he also had a PhD in history. And he was able to really take these events that happened centuries ago and to help put them into language that we could understand in modern days. And it's interesting for me because Joseph Campbell wrote a great book called The Power of Myth. And one of the things he talks about in it is that the major religions that many of us follow today have not been really updated for a very long time. And he considers that in 1980 as being the reason that people can't equate their lives to these stories. And for me, that's exactly what this pastor did. And I think as I was getting closer into this relationship, that is what allowed me to start hearing this other voice that I talk about. And I think sometimes the mistake that we fall into, or the trap we fall into, is something I describe in the book. People say we live our lives on autopilot. I don't think that's the case. I think we do, but I think it's the wrong analogy, because if you're on autopilot, you're still going typically in a positive direction towards your destination. I think so many people today are living their life as if they're a pinball in the game of pinball, and they're so distracted by everything around them. They're so unfocused that they're not keeping the main thing in their life. And to me, that's what this really opened up, is it allowed me to start really being mindful about what I was put here on earth to do. And I think by getting rid of the other noises and really listening to that voice of God telling me, this is why I created you, this is why I made you who you are, and why you're unique. And I wish I would have woken up to that earlier in my life, because I would have started this journey earlier and been able to impact even more people. And I think the other thing, yeah. And I think the other important lesson from this is, similar to a pinball that's just bouncing off the things, I think so much of society right now is about self. And the other thing that I really learned about this is that life is really about the service to others. And that was really one of the most important things that came out of it for me.
Wow, very powerful and extensive. I appreciate the thoroughness of all of your answers, but that last one in particular. We're going to shift now to rapid fire, keeping it short and sweet. Something that few people know about the Navy or serving in it.
So I think something that people don't realize about the Navy is that the Marine Corps is part of the Navy. And so, interestingly enough, if you graduate from the Naval Academy, you actually have the choice of going into either the Marine Corps or the Navy. But the other thing that people don't understand is that even if you go to the Naval Academy, if you want to go into the Air Force, Coast Guard, or another service, you can actually apply in your junior year to do so.
Okay, pretty cool. Let's move on to the next one. Sorry, just a moment, please. There we go. A piece of advice to individuals seeking to overcome self-doubt and embrace a more intentional self.
I think the first thing that you really need to do is to embrace both and thinking. I think so many of us in this world are taught to think linear, where things are only either or. And to me, if you're dealing with self doubt, you need to understand that it's okay to have self criticism. And you also need to have self compassion and self understanding. And I think we put so much criticism on ourselves without giving ourselves the compassion that we make mistakes, that we're going to have fears, and that we have to just rise above them and be compassionate to ourselves, that it's going to take time.
Awesome. The best investment you ever made other than in a stock or real estate?
I think the best investment I ever made was the focus that I put on raising my kids to be the humans that they are. Because I know one of the things that I felt growing up was in the era when I grew up with a former Marine father and a mom who was really a perfectionist, and they made a lot of the important decisions for me. And what I tried to do with my kids was to be very intentional about letting them make mistakes early in life, because I'm sure you've seen it as well. The consequences of mistakes when we get older are much greater. So investing and giving them the freedom to be themselves and to learn, I think, has been paramount into them becoming the humans that they are.
Awesome. Okay. What are you not very good at?
I really do not like spreadsheets and those things. And so when I was going through my MBA, the thought of having to do financial analysis and those things, it just doesn't bring any passion at all to me. So because I don't feel passion, I'm not as good at it.
Okay. Your favorite action figure?
Man, I wrote this great article on, would you rather be Batman or Captain America? And to me, it really came down to Captain America, because I think Captain America really sits on the foundation of virtue and values in the way that he pursues the life that's portrayed in the comics.
If you could only write or speak publicly, but not both, you would?
I think writing is much more profound than speaking. And Adam Grant recently did a whole article on this, and I'm actually going to reproduce it on my podcast. And to me, you can go up there and you can pontificate, but you can also hide behind your what you're saying. To me, words carry so much weight. And if you really understand your subject matter, a person who writes that out is going to do it in much more profound way than I think you could ever sugarcoat a speech.
A productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Something I have been using, and it's in the book. This is something that I learned when I was with Anderson Consulting, is something called the deliberate action process. And while I was there, we learned this really heavy methodology called Method 1. And what I ended up doing was distilling it into 6 steps. And I've used this both professionally and personally. And the 6 steps are that you need to analyze, prioritize, ignite, meaning getting that intrinsic motivation lit up, execute, analyze, and then once you've done that and you've measured, then you renew and you tackle the next thing on your list.
Okay. So you've given us so much to think about, John. How can people connect with you, learn more about your work, and really get inspired by your mission?
And thank you for that. It's really kind of you to ask that. The best 2 places people can go are to my 2 websites. The first is passionstruck.com. And there you can learn everything about the Passion Struck podcast and the book as well. And if you want to learn more about me personally, you can go to John R for Robert Miles.com. And that'll have more about me personally, and also have my blog. And then if you want to follow me on socials, I post daily in almost all places. You can find me at John R. Miles.
Cool. All right, John, I know you've covered so many different areas, but before we go, please leave us with one final life lesson.
So one of my favorite mindfulness meditation people is a woman named Sharon Salzberg that I'm sure the audience has heard about. And she has this great quote: "There's no commodity that we can take with us. There's only our lives, and we can live them wisely or we can live them in ignorance. And this is everything." And to me, this is really the journey that we have of, do we want to create a life where we're like the 76% of people that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, where they regret not living to become their ideal self? Or do we want to live them wisely, as Sharon says, or intentionally in the pursuit of becoming our self-realized self? And to me, that makes all the difference.
Very deep, very profound, and in many ways, just very practical. So thank you very much, John, for that, for all of your wisdom, for sharing your story. Quite a heavy story there at the beginning, but I think it really helped us to apply, what you've learned and your experiences in ways that I think would be helpful to everybody. So thank you again for coming on. And I certainly look forward to staying in touch and to continue to learn from your passion and your commitment to purpose. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
No, it was an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.